We often celebrate happy events. For example, yearly a birthday. Celebrate birthdays. If somebody wins a medal in a contest, we just watched some basketball today maybe, and you win a Big Ten championship, you get a medal or a trophy and keep it at your room, and you can be reminded of that wonderful event. And we have celebrations too in the church's year, like Christmas, Easter, resurrection, very happy events. But imagine if we took more time to celebrate the hard seasons and had medals for getting through the difficult seasons. For example, how many people in the service, Marines or Army or Air Force, Navy, look back and say, man, wasn't that boot camp something? And treasure that? Every year we should have a celebration to remember boot camp. No, not too often. How many of the teams who do have victories think about, if you will, spring training and all celebrate? Wow, wasn't that great? All those stretching exercises and all those miles and killers we had to run. Or if somebody had unemployment and really made them reevaluate their life and go back and celebrate that tough time of unemployment. No, but truth be told, it's often those tough desert seasons that are the most transforming. And maybe we should give more consideration to celebrating them, as indeed the church does. Every year we celebrate the season of Lent. Now, it didn't just come from Christianity, but actually Judaism started with this kind of mentality. Judaism had how many years in the desert? 40 years. And 40 years in the desert, they were fleeing from Egypt, saved from slavery, and went into the promised land. Now you think, well, they've got a feast day that celebrates the freedom from Egypt. We're going to call it Passover. And then, of course, they're going to love the fact that they inherited their land. But what about the desert? Do they have a celebration for the desert? Do they have a liturgy where they say, we got to give thanks to God for the desert? Well, actually they do. And who knows what it's called? The Feast of Booths. The Feast of Booths, or in Hebrew, Sukkot. Sukkot. And Sukkot means tents or huts. And so they celebrate this feast usually September or October, remembering the 40 years in the desert. Now what happened in the desert? Well, there was some challenging things. Okay, like what are we going to eat today? That was a big challenging thing. And they were hungry. Sometimes they had this manna over and over and over again, but it was a miraculous kind of bread. The bread of angels was called. God gave it to them in the morning with the dew. Then they got sick of the bread and they said, we just wish we had meat, and God gave them quails. And they got sick of the quails. And then because of all their complaining, they had snakes that were biting their feet. They had to put a snake on the pole so that they could be healed. And then they're thirsty, and they're complaining about thirst, and Moses touches the rock and the water comes out. And how were they led? How were they led? By day and by night. A pillar of fire at night and a cloud by day. Well, the desert had many challenging things, but it also had many wondrous things. God in a cloud and a pillar of fire. That is wondrous. The fact that they could get this bread in the Egyptian desert, I've been there, there's not much. Rock. That was wondrous. That water comes from a rock. Wonders, but maybe that was the time that they were most transformed. So, they have a feast called the Feast of Booths. Now, in other languages, booths, translated to Greek is skene, translated into Latin, tabernaculum. Tabernaculum. Tabernacle is like the word for small booth or small hut. And part of the point is this. Why do we have a little hut, a little booth right here? Why do we have that in church? We put Jesus our Lord in there at Eucharist, is transubstantiated, transfigured. We keep our Lord there. We bring our Lord to the sick in the hospital, to those who are homebound. Why a little hut, a little house, a little tent? Because we're all pilgrims. And when the Israelites were pilgrims, they had to have tents that they would take up in the morning, and they would hike, and they'd put them back up at night. And then they would sleep in them. Tents were a sign that they were pilgrims on a journey. And so are we. This tabernacle is a sign that we are pilgrims on a journey. To be on a journey towards a great destination, which is heaven. Now, what is the most challenging class you've had? What is the most challenging sport you've had to prepare for? What is the most challenging health issue you've had to overcome? What is the most challenging friendship you've had to work on? Ask yourself for a moment, did you really grow through that? Did you grow through that maybe even more than the other times, the easy times? I'd suggest that's probably true for all of us. Moses and Elijah appeared with Jesus. My final point. We often think about Moses and Elijah as symbolizing the writings of the Old Testament. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament called the Pentateuch. The rest of the Old Testament sometimes is summarized as the prophets. There are wisdom documents and historical books, but prophets fill the texts. So in a way, Moses and Elijah with Jesus, it's all telling us Jesus fulfills everything written by Moses and the prophets. But there's something else that is often unnoticed. Moses and Elijah spent a lot of time in the desert, many years in the desert. They didn't become great prophets, great scriptural authors, great saints in simply pleasant territory. The desert was necessary. So today we consider ourselves in the season of Lent, a kind of desert, and the church does celebrate it annually. The times of the deserts, the times where we grow the most.